So, about Goro Akechi, he's obviously quite the disaster and has done terrible things. All those who hate his guts have every right to do so, since he is responsible for, among other things, murdering Futaba's mom, shooting Haru's dad, and, of course, killing us, the player, if it weren't for delicious pancakes. I admit that I'm just partial to Akechi, even though I do believe he must be held accountable for his crimes. He's a complex character whose background highlights many sociocultural issues that are unique to Japan. I love international studies and will be graduating with a degree in social work soon, so I find that Akechi's childhood serves as an interesting case study regarding the holes within the Japanese social service system. On another note, my late mom was from Japan, and my dad's side of the family is of Japanese descent, so studying the sociocultural issues of the country is just a neat way for me to feel connected to my heritage. With that said, the main theme that I'll be exploring in this video is the balance between Akechi, the victim, and Akechi, the perpetrator, via examining all the masks he must don in Japanese society in order to realize, as put in his very own words, an absurd grudge that's extremely personal. I hope to show how his role in P5 slots him in as the perfect foil, not only to Joker, I mean, they're two sides of the same coin, not only to each one of the other Phantom Thieves in some way or another, but how he serves as the most nuanced take in regards to P5's most prominent theme, which is all about power dynamics and the cycle of abuse. It says a lot that he is the only teenager in the story that's committing deeds that are just as atrocious as those done by those rotten adults. I've included timestamps for certain sections in the description for your viewing pleasure, but otherwise, whether you love or hate the guy, I hope this video can provide you with some new insight into Goro Akechi. So before we can do a deep dive into the Japanese sociocultural issues surrounding Akechi, we first need to establish what exactly his background is, which brings us to his role/confidant in the vanilla P5. I find this a good place to start since, firstly, the OG P5 provides the initial knowledge that a large portion of the fanbase will be drawing from, or aka will have already formed an opinion on since we've experienced that game first. And secondly, laying out the cards here will let us draw comparison later to Akechi's confidant in Royal, and how the new release vastly improves on his character and relationship with the protag. Because I can't help but be unnecessarily convoluted, we're going to start by discussing the structure of the vanilla game's confidant first. So, as much as I enjoyed what we got out of OG P5, my biggest gripe revolved around how a substantial part involving Akechi could only be inferred since his plotline wasn't nearly as fleshed out to the extent Atlas was probably hoping it was. Since they were capitalizing on Akechi's relationship to Joker, and vice versa, resonating with the player in the final encounter on Shido's ship, well, we can see how the execution fell pretty flat. This was mostly due to a failure in properly defining Joker's feelings of camaraderie with Akechi prior to the showdown. We can assume that yes, the two must have developed a solid bond off-screen. Even I inferred this myself after first playing the game, but I recognize that it's just sloppy writing to have to resort to this kind of headcanoning in the first place. The fact remains that we see little evidence of a bond developing from Joker's side of the relationship. which is the pitfall of this automatic confidant. What we did get out of each rank was either 1. A scene that had to be shared with other important characters, or 2. The building of their relationship fell backseat to the furthering of the main plotline, aka the Phantom Thieves versus the entire Shido conspiracy, since ultimately every palace ruler was tied back to Shido in some way. Now, let's get into dissecting P5's Confidant. Rank 1 was like most rank 1s. It merely establishes the first meeting and initial impression of the character. So let's look at rank 2 and 3 then. Rank 2 involves all the other Phantom Thieves and lasts like 5 minutes at most. Rank 3 already begins on a really rough note, since Akechi just shows up out of the blue to Leblon for the first time, while Sojiro and the newly not shut-in Futaba are present. Since the player is likely already further attached to the latter two characters by this point, it easily gives off this weird atmosphere that Akechi is showing up uninvited, unlike other confidants where Joker personally decides to hang out with that person. Not only this, but this is just an awkward way for Akechi to bring up his tragic backstory, especially when Joker and the player are unlikely to have built a rapport towards Akechi, unless they tend to be naturally drawn to his character archetype in the first place. This happens on August 28th in both games, which is more than enough time to have had more interactions with Akechi in Royal, since the detective's confidant opens up more than 2 months earlier on June 10th. I'll expand on this point when I talk about Royal later in the vid, but back to the original P5's rank 4. It's not bad, but it still has to balance time furthering the main plot with Shido. Rank 5, 6, and 7 all fall into the trap of having to share screen time with the rest of the Phantom Thieves and having to establish the group's main rivalry with Shido's conspiracy. Rank 5 is the panel at Shujin, rank 6 is finding Sae's palace, and I just need to point out, by the way, how odd it is that out of anything, the instance where Akechi brings up his very personal grudge doesn't even get its own rank up scene. It's especially weird since it has to do with his view on justice, and he's the Justice Arcana. Speaking of Akechi's justice, rank 8 is the shoot point blank, welp, guess I just got murdered moment, and with the context we have so far of Akechi and Joker's almost non-existent bond, how is this supposed to show its strengthening? Rank 9 at least holds some symbolism, since that's when all the other party members get their Protect Joker ability in battle, meaning Akechi ranked up just in time to sacrifice himself for the thieves in rank 10. Sorry, it's not my intention to call any of these scenes outright bad. Of course they're not. They actually coincide quite well with the reverse Justice Arcana and do give us valuable insight into Akechi's background, his wit, and his mannerisms. However, the main thing I'm trying to draw attention to is how these scenes do little to show how a true bond, which is one that's equally valued by both sides, has developed between Joker and Akechi. Wow, okay. I hope you guys are still with me, cause now we can finally move on to defining Akechi's background within the proper sociocultural context. I'm not surprised that he's more controversial in the international community, but I think that can be attributed in some part to a wider misunderstanding of his circumstances due to cultural barriers. I'm not trying to absolve him of his terrible actions, But we need to understand how the stigma of his lived childhood and adolescence drives his resentment towards Japanese society and, most importantly, Shido. So, first of all, we must understand that Japan's, and wider Asia's, collectivist culture is very different from the more individualistic societies in the West. Collectivist values place emphasis on group cohesion over the self, while individualistic values favor the freedom of the individual over the collective. So, why does this matter? Well, any deviance from the majority or the natural societal order is met with heightened stigma in collectivist Japan compared to the USA, for example. In other words, if you don't fit in with the norm, you're basically screwed. Now, let's look at how this affects the detective boy. So, in rank 3 of Akechi's Confidant, we learn that he was born out of wedlock to one of Shido's mistresses, who happened to be swiftly discarded by Shido when he learned of her pregnancy. Yes, she is literally described as his mistress, who eventually took her own life after facing the stigma brought on by having an illegitimate child like Goro. Akechi confirms in his rank 6 confidant in Royal that she would shoo him out of the house when she had to bring men home at night, aka she was a sex worker to some capacity. These details are clear in the original Japanese text, but are much more vague in the English localization. I normally don't hold particularly strong opinions towards the changes made in the localization process, especially since I'm not completely fluent in the language myself. However, proper translation is just too important this time around. Thankfully, some amazing people in this fandom have made their notes on the translation discrepancies public, so I'll bring up other relevant instances later. I'll also include the links to the translations in the video description. Now strap in, cause here's where I start pulling out all the data and figures. As of 2011, the rate of childbirths to non-married couples in Japan was only at 2.2%. In contrast, the USA's rate is at 40.7%, and on various other continents throughout the world, the percentages range from 30 to 70%. Even when at its peak in 1902, Japan's rate of out-of-wedlock births was less than 10% at 9.02%. As we can see, since there is such a profound emphasis placed on the traditional family value of marriage before children in Japan, there's an intense societal stigma placed on these illegitimate kids and their moms. Akechi was then shoved into the institutionalized foster care system after his mom committed suicide. At this point, we arrive at the term throwaway children. Yes, in Japan, kids who are placed into the orphanage or foster care institutions are colloquially known as throwaway children. In fact, it's not uncommon for Japanese families living in poverty or struggling with domestic abuse in their homes to relinquish their children over to an orphanage, even though they'll still retain legal rights to their kids due to what's called the Kosaki system, which I'll get into later. But going back to these children, they become stuck in limbo because they can't be legally adopted out, though their parents will rarely come back for them. So, in other words, they are quite literally thrown away. With this info, it becomes easier to see how Akechi's lamentation over being an unwanted child starts holding more weight. The wider Japanese populace often just assumes that kids who grow up in these facilities have some type of disability. There's also not nearly enough staffers to care for the number of children, and the ratio is often one caretaker to nearly 10 kids. A woman who grew up in this system shared how she and the other kids felt as if the staff was just fulfilling their work responsibilities. They didn't make her feel loved or protected as a guardian should have. The majority of adolescents who grow up in these institutions end up on the very bottom rung of Japanese society upon graduation from this system, usually around the ages of 15 to 18, and are chronically homeless and living in poverty. The Human Rights Watch denounced Japan in 2014 for prioritizing institutionalization over placing children in foster families. Kids just can't be adequately prepared to lead independent and productive lives under these circumstances. Akechi says he was passed around from foster family to foster family, so he would have stayed in these overcrowded institutions during the times in between. Now, there's a big reason why foster care/adoption is still frowned upon in Japan, to the point where 90% of these unwanted kids are kept in overcrowded orphanages at any given time. Remember the Koseki system I briefly brought up before? Well, this family registry is basically a citizen's form of legal identification among a ton of other things. Marriage in the family, registered in the Koseki. Divorce, registered in the Koseki. Birth in the family, registered in the Koseki. Proof of property ownership, you get where I'm going with this. Any one Japanese family has their own individual koseki, with women being transferred over to their husband's koseki, aka when they take his name, 96% of the time after marriage. In fact, any one of these major events in a person's life would hold no legal weight if it wasn't registered under the koseki. The very existence of this system has a profound influence on the way Japanese society comes to view the family. It results in a rigid mentality that family is only related by blood. Since adoptions are recorded in the koseki, any stigma surrounding the adoptee would be plain to see. Families wouldn't want to tarnish their image by taking in troubled kids, and welcoming in a stranger's child is just commonly seen as unnatural. On another note, adoption in Japan is generally seen as bringing people into the family koseki for the purpose of inheritance. Adult males between the ages of 20 and 30, usually the husbands of the daughters, make up the vast majority, or over 80,000 a year, of adoptees in order for family businesses to continue a line of male successors over generations. This type of adoption even has a special name, mukoyoshi. All these reasons combined explain why child/adolescent adoption is so rare in Japan. So, in Akechi's case, he would have been registered under his mom's koseki, not Shido's, since the two were never married, and koseki law would automatically register Goro as illegitimate. This status would be plain to see just by looking at his koseki record. This possibility for discrimination and genuine societal stigma drives Akechi's desperation to get back at Shido when he finally gets the chance after being handpicked by Yaldabaoth. Throwaway children like him wouldn't have had much in future prospects anyway, so what does he have to lose? Now that we've established the relevant sociocultural context, let's revisit Akechi's role in the story for the first 2/3 of the game, but this time through the lens of Royal's no longer automatic Confidant. And since P5R just moved all the vanilla Confidant scenes to the main story, we get the best of both worlds, with Royal's new Confidant focusing on building Akechi up as a character, Akechi as a person, and most importantly, developing the bond between him and Joker. It's also chock full of symbolic foreshadowing, so I hope to showcase how not a single rank is wasted and how each one builds upon the last. Starting with rank 1, we already see a major improvement with the added handshake. Not only does it establish friendlier terms between the detective and Joker right from the get-go, but it ties in nicely to rank 8's glove scene. Akechi states how this is a tradition in the West, which also holds true for shaking hands. I've visited Japan many times in the past to see my relatives, and it's still cultural custom to bow when greeting another person. The only times Japanese people might shake hands is if they are greeting an obvious Westerner, so it's odd that Akechi would instigate this with another native Japanese person, right? It just goes to show that the handshake and glove scenes portray Akechi as a well-learned individual, since he is familiar with both casual and obscure Western traditions. The two also exchange numbers during this first meeting, unlike in the OG P5 where we go through the entire game up to Saya's palace before doing so. This changes the way Makoto obtains Akechi's number in order to invite him as a guest to the Shujin Cultural Festival. Originally, Futaba found his number off of the info they got from Saya's computer, but in Royal, Ryuji is shocked that Joker already has Akechi's number, which says a lot as even Joker's best bro didn't know he was hanging out with the detective. And even if the player hasn't been doing Akechi's Confidant, the fact that Joker already has his contact info in the main story scene does at least give off the impression that they're closer than what was shown in the initial P5. The conversation in rank 1 otherwise remains the same, with particular note on Akechi's thought that adults are only interested in using the young, while they simply do as the adults say. In hindsight, we can see how Akechi's lived adolescent experiences have conditioned him to feel as if the youth are powerless against the adults governing society. It helps explain why Akechi is willing to ruin himself and throw in with Shido's lot, since, unlike Joker, he didn't have faith that his poor circumstances could be changed. We'll return to this concept later in the video. Beginning with rank 2, Joker now voluntarily makes time to hang out with Akechi. And not only does this scene show that, yes, even the detective likes to have fun, but there's also a lot of symbolic foreshadowing going down. Akechi starts off the game using his left hand and pockets the 9-ball on the first shot, achieving a break ace and automatically winning the entire rack. This shows how skilled he is, especially when compared to Joker at this point in time. Without drawing attention to it, Akechi handicaps himself and only uses his right hand in the new game. Even then, he still ends up beating Joker, the latter losing because his final shot didn't have enough force behind it. I think this symbolically stands in for resolve. In the latter months, we learn just how far Akechi is willing to go to realize the goal he's been tirelessly working towards for over 2 years now. Not only has he committed murder for Shido's conspiracy, but he's also willing to kill Joker, basically the only person he truly values, in late November. Though his goals have changed once we reach the 3rd semester, there's no question that he still stands resolute in his own beliefs. In this sense, Joker needed to strengthen his own resolve to best Akechi in the main story, to be willing to gamble his life in the interrogation room and still believe in Akechi's rank 8 promise on Shido's ship and right before the new semester starts. a choice that allows the player to witness the true ending as intended by the P5R devs. But going back to the Confidant, Joker still displays his sharp mind in this rank's wrap-up via noticing Akechi has switched hands. This of course impresses and even flatters him since, remember, Akechi has experienced little instance of others actually caring about him enough to notice these little details. Overall, this entire scene marks the budding exploration of their rivalry, friendship, and the greater overall theme that they are two sides of the same coin. Rank 3 is where the Confidant starts implementing some more obscure aspects of Akechi that were conceptualized but were unable to make it into the base game, as is listed in the official art book. One such example is his tendency to try whatever food item that is popular at the time, even though he personally doesn't hold any strong flavor preferences. So, lo and behold, they try out a popular cake at a trendy cafe, even though Akechi doesn't have a particular affinity for sweets. His reaction to the attention he starts to receive from onlookers highlights the duality of his desire to be recognized and loved. On one hand, he truly does crave such things, but the attention from superficial fans is only so meaningful. Witnessing this moment, I think Akechi recognizes on some subconscious level that he can't get the kind of attention he truly craves from these people. But even more importantly, the way that Joker comes to Akechi's rescue provides a huge look into the dynamic of their relationship. First, let's establish that Joker's glasses serve as the literal mask he dons to the world. He only lets his true self be seen in the metaverse. In the real world, the only times his face is unobstructed by these lenses is 1. Understandably at the beach with everyone else, 2. During the big moment in the interrogation room, and 3. In this one Confidant scene with Akechi. Joker voluntarily removes his mask and entrusts the item that represents it to the detective, literally letting him wear it. This symbolizes a level of understanding and camaraderie between the two that isn't shared among any of Joker's other bonds when hanging out together one-on-one. And not only this, but the unmasked Joker doesn't hide away. He continues to face Akechi straight on, while the latter pretty flawlessly adopts the meek persona that Joker dons in the real world, once again demonstrating that they are two sides of the same coin. The follow-up phone call says a lot too, since Akechi, who holds great pride in his outward appearance, suggests that Joker could successfully pull off the switch as him. Now we're moving on to rank 4, which demonstrates another big step forward for Akechi. He invites Joker to his go-to jazz club, which is unlike the trendy cafe they went to last time. Akechi is a regular at Jazz Gin and voluntarily decides to share this place, a place where he finds comfort, with Joker. Actually, the MC is the only person Akechi has ever brought to the jazz club. Joker reciprocates such trust and mentions his current lodgings at Café Leblanc and his circumstances for being in Tokyo. More background from the art book makes its way in as well. We hear from Akechi that he lives alone, and we just get more insight into his character as an actual person who has likes and interests outside of just as this, Phantom Thieves that we hear from his Detective Prince persona the whole game. He really enjoys jazz, just like how Makoto has a soft spot for Buchimaru-kun, or On's interest in modeling. Learning about this kind of stuff further signifies a real bond growing between Joker and Akechi. Rank 5 sees Akechi wanting to expand his horizons to things he's otherwise never tried before, so he invites Joker to an arcade, where his skill at the difficult shooting game foreshadows his experience in the metaverse. Most notably though, this rank is when Akechi begins opening up about certain things in his childhood that he would otherwise never share with anyone else. The story of the toy gun and how he wanted to play hero as a kid will be particularly important later on when we discuss Akechi and possibility of remorse. But for now, let's take a look at his question to Joker about different kinds of heroes. This fits the themes of the Justice Arcana and how it balances justice based on objectivity versus that which is based on one's own subjective view. Ring any bells? It's the same dichotomy that Akechi balances between his detective prince persona and his true maniacal vengeance side as the Black Mask. This rank is also where we're shown the first real glimpse of Akechi's budding jealousy of Joker. He admits that he must practice diligently if he wishes to take Joker out. It ends on a wholesome note though, since Joker gets to affirm that he enjoys the competition, and Akechi thanks the MC for his time, as he usually finds it difficult to enjoy the kinds of pastimes that other teens like. Rank 6 unlocks on September 3rd and can only be started when Akechi is sitting at LeBlanc's counter. It's just a nice attention to detail since he stated his intent to make LeBlanc his new go-to cafe just a week prior to this unlocking. This rank also solidifies Soldier Bro as the best wingman. Yup, we've arrived at the bathhouse scene, where there's definitely no signs of any ship tease, right? I'm sure most of you are familiar with the onsen, or aka outdoor hot springs, from other JRPGs, anime, and manga, but even just in general, it's Japanese custom to soak in the bathtub every night. This is because soaking is seen not just as a way to cleanse the body, but to alleviate the mind from stress and impurities as well. With this context, we can clearly see the importance of this scene. It shows that both Akechi and Joker are willing to let their guard down and be vulnerable around the other. Whether you take that in the super close bros way or through shipping goggles, Akechi outright shares about something super taboo in wider Japanese culture, that his mom was a sex worker. And of course, it's shown that both of them just get each other, cause everything is made into a fun competition in the end. The follow-up call is important too, since Akechi admits it was nice to finally relax and not spend his day as the detective prince for once. He subtly admits to Joker that his job is not always what it's cracked up to be, once again demonstrating the tension between Akechi's desire for meaningful attention as opposed to just wherever he can get it. Everyone has high expectations of him since he's so capable, but otherwise no one actually cares about him. Now, moving on to rank 7, keep in mind that it can't be started until Saya's palace opens up, meaning the final plan to eliminate Joker has already been set into motion at this point. So, as is common in Akechi's Confidant, there's tons of abstract foreshadowing here, starting with billiards as the symbolically perfect game of choice in this Confidant, which I'll explain in just a moment. So, Akechi brings up how one must be precise but circuitous when playing. In other words, the ball one aims to pocket can't be struck directly with the cue stick, but instead must be hit indirectly with the cue ball. He and Joker then compare this description to a number of relevant events going on around them, such as the psychotic breakdowns, or even the way in which the Phantom Thieves are able to make people confess. What stands out most to me, though, is how this also alludes to Akechi's entire plan to get vengeance on Shido. How? Well, Akechi follows up with a bad play, then remarks how it's never a guarantee that the ball can be precisely controlled or prevented from unintentionally striking unrelated obstacles along the way. He then turns to Joker and asks if he still intends to play, knowing this. Within this context, billiards can symbolize 3 other things in particular. 1, the Phantom Thieves being drawn into this whole metaverse/persona business in the first place. C, Akechi's revenge against Shido had already been in the works long before the PT got started back in April, so from his perspective, the vigilantes can be viewed as unrelated obstacles that will be struck simply because they lie on the path. 2. A twisted reference to Akechi's plan to betray the PTs and kill Joker at the end of the month. Is the MC still willing to play with this metaverse game despite knowing that another user exists, aka the Black Mask? And 3. Akechi's own willingness to bloody his hands with countless bodies over these past couple years in order to realize his warped view of justice on Shido. This conversation seems short and simple upon first glance, but is actually super cool with its abstract references. Anyway, the game ends with Joker's victory, which is the perfect foreshadowing to him besting Akechi, who has been one step ahead of the PT all game in the approaching interrogation room gamble, and both the loss in billiards and the main story later can be attributed to Akechi underestimating his opponent's abilities. The rivalry is solidified further both via Akechi's question at the end and the follow-up call. Even if Joker considers the detective's offer, the latter won't allow the MC to join his side. Deep down, he respects Joker for who he has chosen to be, regardless of who or what society tells him. He will not allow Joker to betray his very own self and values. That's why sticking to the rivalry responses really resonates with Akechi. It shows that Joker is on the same page as him when it comes to the way he views their relationship, holding a respect for the other's skill, which drives them both to become better. Okay, we've finally arrived at the last voluntary rank up, so thanks for sticking with my TED Talk so far. This is where their rivalry comes at us in full swing. Akechi makes good on his promise to use his dominant hand, though billiards isn't what's on the table this time. This is also when Akechi starts showing more of his real side via dishing out some menacingly tsundere compliments. When the two are fighting one-on-one like this, it's easy to see the completely opposite stances they take in battle. This is symbolic of how they face their difficult life circumstances. Akechi remains rigid in his belief that there's no place in society for people like him. He remains stiff and obedient to the corrupt adults in the sole purpose of exacting his personal revenge. He has no faith that society can truly be reformed. In contrast, Joker's stance is fluid and adaptable, mirroring how he faces his adversity with a flexibility that makes way for hope that things can change and look up for the better. Let's not forget the stark contrast between the complete white of Akechi's attire and Joker's black outfit. They truly are two sides of the same coin, both having to face adversity that highlights the holes in Japanese society, yet responding in opposite ways. After the duel is over, Akechi slips up and admits that Joker has caught up to him on this front as well. You know what I'm gonna say, more foreshadowing to Akechi's lies of having awakened to a persona only recently. Then at last, we reach the best part, the confrontation. This does an infinitely better job at setting up the final battle in Shido's palace. Of course, the entire royal confidant is to thank for slowly building up to this, but this scene specifically gives us a taste of Akechi's difficult maelstrom of conflicting feelings and thoughts that are just dumped on us in the vanilla game. He admires Joker's ability to rise up above life's challenges, but seethes angrily that it's exactly what he failed to do himself. He values Joker's company and deft ability to quickly pick up on a variety of skills, yet can't help but feel jealous that someone else is just as capable as he is. I'll expand on this more in the coming section, so let's wrap this rank up. Akechi gets to show off more of his obscure smarts, citing a Western tradition when flinging his glove at Joker. this tangible symbol of their promise adds quite a bit of depth to Joker's development in the third semester. But we need to examine Akechi's vengeance plot and the final showdown first. At last, we've arrived at the final act of Akechi's Confidant. The first meeting since his traitorous and cruel side was officially revealed when he shot Joker in the head. Now, thankfully, these last 2 ranks in Shido's ship are building off the infinitely better Royal rank 8 instead of the nonsense we got in the vanilla game. Now, let's look at what we do know about Akechi's life and his vengeance plot from what little we learn from the game. In a crazed fashion, Akechi reveals that he was gifted his persona powers 2 years prior to the PT's debut, and doesn't care if a god or demon was the one who bestowed them. The only thing that matters to him is that some nobody of his ilk, which society completely looked down upon, was given a chance. His scathing response to the Phantom Thieves' criticism reveals a cruel mentality that can likely be attributed in some part to his upbringing. It's common for hierarchical positions to develop in these overcrowded orphanages, where the older and stronger kids bully and take from the younger and weaker. There's no way that this kind of experience hasn't influenced his view on the world. How he feels justified in taking the lives of many, including 2 of our teammates' parents, as Shido's hitman in this eat or be eaten world. This all just perpetuates the cycle of abuse and how the abused often turn into the abusers themselves. With this in mind, let's take a moment to examine how cruel Yaldabaoth really is. He just straight up dropped godlike powers onto a young, downtrodden kid just so he could bear witness to some cool social experiment, with some pretty high stakes admittedly, the fate of humanity and all that. What's so nefarious about this to me is the fact that metaverse powers are so exploitable. Look, I'm not trying to woobify Akechi, since he is still responsible for his own actions in the end. I'm just trying to bring up how it's really shitty to hand a baseball bat to a literally starving kid, then point to one of those glass vending machines and tell them not to grab the food in there. The metaverse takes this temptation much further, and I'll explain in just a moment. So, at the time that Akechi received his powers, other people like Futaba's mom were already aware of, and even researching, this cognitive science stuff. However, none of them would have been able to make much use of it. Only individuals who have awakened to a persona could actively move within that world, meaning that there'd be no one to witness Akechi commit crimes within the metaverse, and that meant he couldn't get caught. Well, not with any physical evidence anyway, which brings me to a summary, as written by the US Department of Justice, of some interesting psychological studies. They found that the certainty of being caught was a much more powerful deterrent of crime than the actual punishment itself. Now, let's take the stealth of the metaverse even further. So, Akechi offered his abilities to Shido with the sole purpose of getting close to him. Then, as Shido made use of Akechi, more and more officials wanted access to these metaverse services as well. This included the police and SIU director, all who corruptly sought out Shido's help of their own accord. This meant double the protection from ever being brought in for Akechi, since the police and the courts were already on his side as well. Remember Akechi's rank 7 Confidant and how he drew attention to the theoretical perfect crime? Well, Akechi's entire scheme hinges on his ability to avoid capture, since his wish is to reveal himself only once Shido reached the apex of his power, which was still years away at their initial meeting. By the way, Akechi was 15 when he got his powers, meaning he was still an obvious adolescent. Adults and teens think with a different region of the brain, you see. Adults use the prefrontal cortex to process information, aka the rational part, while teens use the amygdala, which is the emotional part. It's why even the smartest or most rational teens can act rashly sometimes, and why social workers fought for a juvenile court system in the first place. For example, take Makoto giving chase to Kanashiro's men, only to be caught in the end. Similarly, Akechi coming up with such a childish delusion at least makes some sense. Shido even calls him an idiot for not seeing he was just gonna be disposed of after the election. Let's also bring in some other food for thought. Shido's shadow says it was thanks to him that Akechi was properly able to use his powers in the first place, meaning it's probable that Akechi wasn't even aware what one could do, that one could kill people in real life if they were killed in the metaverse, if it weren't for Shido's involvement and orders. But I digress. Let's move on to the Black Mask and Loki's unique ability, Call of Chaos. When used, the target becomes desperate, decreasing its defense but raising its attack. I find it more than likely that Loki is Akechi's initial persona because of this skill, Desperation. Think about where Akechi was in life prior to being handpicked by Yaldabaoth. Recall the poor prospects that throwaway children have in Japanese society. Now let's look at what Akechi says. That even the feeblest existence can gain tremendous power when the chains on his heart are broken. Sound familiar? That's literally what happened to him. Yaldabaoth granted him his persona, which is possible only when one accepts their shadow. Akechi brings up how Joker's heart is always free, the exact opposite of his. We don't need to look far to see that jealousy and bitterness are real things that Akechi struggles with. So, in this sense, awakening to Loki allowed him to make good on his true feelings and set his vengeance into motion. Akechi's sheer desperation in life dropped his very own guard to any possible consequences of his actions. He didn't mind having to become a killer to do it. All he cared about was going on the attack and realizing his dreams of revenge on his crummy father. So lastly, let's return to Joker and Akechi as foils. We already talked about this to a certain extent in the prior section, so to wrap it up, all we need to do is look at Akechi's rage-filled attic trash rant. There's definitely some projecting going on here, and in psychology, projection refers to unconsciously taking unwanted emotions or traits you don't like about yourself and attributing them to someone else. Akechi is obviously hung up about being an illegitimate and unwanted foster care kid. Compound the fact that his very existence indirectly caused his mom to commit suicide, and well, it's not surprising that, deep down, he has some self-esteem issues. So he can't help but project this onto Joker, the criminal trash living in an attic. See, Joker's current circumstance isn't so different from Akechi's in that he's currently being fostered by Sojiro right now, while, I guess in a monetary sense, Shido is fostering Akechi in return for his hitman services. I mean, how else would a kid afford an apartment in Tokyo? But anyway, so Joker isn't in that different of a situation, and yet he has a whole group of friends and a guardian figure who love and support him, while Akechi was too busy keeping everyone at arm's length to develop any meaningful bonds. Not only this, but clearly he and Joker share much of the same traits. They are both clever, intelligent, resourceful, willing to take risks, and are skilled at a wide variety of things. They are both also sold as a jack of all trades, though in two very different ways. Joker makes full use of the wildcard ability by forging bonds with his confidants, giving him an infinite amount of personas at his disposal. He also gathers other persona user friends who all have different strengths that he can rely on in a pinch. In contrast, Akechi relied only on himself, though Loki is a jack-of-all-trades persona with its well-balanced stats and variety of physical, magic, and support skills. Not to mention the ease in which Akechi picked apart the puzzles in Sae's palace, clearly demonstrating that he's used to soloing these places on his own. He's obviously super capable, but made the worst decision ever to go through with his delusional scheme. It's not surprising that he stuck with it even in those final months, since he had already come so far and was so close to the end, and essentially sacrificed his humanity in the process. He only gains the resolve to save the Phantom Thieves when the cognition of him cruelly affirms that he stood no chance from the very beginning. All in all, he basically squandered whatever potential future a bright kid like him may have had, even as a throwaway child. This perfectly highlights the tragic nature of his character to me, and marks him as the perfect foil to Joker, who rose above the bad hand he was dealt. So just like the meek glasses boy demeanor Joker adopts during his probation period, the super goody-goody, nothing ever phases him Detective Prince image is just a mask Akechi dons to the public. I appreciate the complexity of Akechi's desire to be noticed and loved. On some level, he does relish in the attention he gets as a Detective Prince. That this many people in the public care enough to know his name. At the same time though, this popularity is hollow to him. He says he'd rather lay low and focus on something mundane, like his studies, than ride on the wave of this public admiration. But back to Robinhood as a persona. I do think he represents aspects of Akechi's personality, traits that, I'll argue, were drawn out by the bond he developed with Joker. Akechi can't help but associate the concept of justice with the MC. I mean, their first meeting revolved around the question of if the Phantom Thieves were just or unjust. At other points in the Confidant, Akechi recalls or shares very personal beliefs, as they pertain to justice, from his childhood. Things that he hasn't done in years. In the arcade rank-up, Akechi is reminded of a toy gun he used to play with when he was a kid. He's able to recall that, yes, at some point in time, he did want to be a hero. This long-abandoned desire to play hero, to do good, is further expanded upon in rank 6. Akechi holds no contempt for his mom who had to resort to sex work. Instead, he places all the responsibility on his dad, who we know is a high-ranking Shido, for abandoning them to such a meager existence. In this sense, we see evidence that Akechi has some sort of empathy for the underdogs of society. At least, he did when he was younger, since he says he wanted to get his mom the apology she deserves, but she tragically passed on before that could ever happen. His regret about not meeting Joker a few years earlier is really telling, since the guy's such a good influence on so many people. It's also just a shame that they didn't have more time together, since Akechi is the only voluntary confidant where Joker isn't helping the other person out, or vice versa. They're just simply hanging out, enjoying each other's company. But moving on, there's another instance where Akechi shows some regret about the path he has taken. Right as he's confronting the PT for the first time, Morgana explains how they're able to change people's hearts. Akechi literally facepalms and says there's no way for a person to figure out such a modus operandi. Remember that Joker, Ryuji, and An had Morgana to teach them how to find a route to the treasure, get it to materialize, and steal it so the ruler would confess their crimes. Without him, the other three may have had to resort to ending Kamoshida. So if Akechi knew this totally complicated process from the get-go, perhaps he would have put more consideration into changing Shido's heart right from the start. A part of Akechi is merciful as well. For example, changing Sae's heart would prevent her from going down the wrong path, and also allow her to escape the mess with Shido's conspiracy. Aside from Joker, I think Sae was one of the only other people, the other being Kasumi, who Akechi developed a certain fondness for. They were working on the same case for months after all. He also allowed the other Phantom Thieves to go free after dealing with Joker, even though he could have had them all arrested. Lastly, I want to bring up translator Anon's observation of Akechi's final request. In English, he places the emphasis on changing Shido's heart. This can come across as more self-serving, since changing a person's heart is what leads to them confessing their crimes with their own mouth. And of course, Akechi and his mom are just a few who have been wronged by the man. However, in the original Japanese, he says, "Change Shido's heart, end his crimes, in my stead." In this case, emphasis is placed on ending his crimes. This harkens back to how there is a part of Akechi that does want to see real justice done and the abuse of future victims to stop. Combined with what we know about the toy gun story and how he wanted justice for his mom, I want to believe this theory that Akechi awakened to Robinhood sometime after he met Joker, that he was reminded of the kind of person he used to aspire to before he became so disillusioned with the world. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's the picture of absolute remorse, 'cause he's definitely not. However, I do have a couple more arguments for this that we'll touch on in these last sections. So can we start off this third semester section by appreciating Navigator Akechi's lines? Soichiro Hoshi and Robbie Damon have been absolute gems so far, but the addition of their new semester performances just takes it to the next level. But anyway, sorry my gushing, let's try to unpack this from the beginning. The first major difference from Vanilla P5's ending is that Akechi turns himself in so Joker won't have to. If he didn't feel some measure of remorse, why would he do this? Especially if the MC and the rest of the PTs would have just assumed him dead. This month of January is where we see the disastrously awesome mishmash of the real Akechi, which touches on all his character growth up to this point in a meaningful way. First off, since the Detective Prince jig is up with the Phantom Thieves, there's no reason for him to act like that anymore. It's not like it's a total 180 though. The Detective Akechi always had been blunt and not afraid to speak his mind. These instances with Makoto, Futaba, and Sae are just some examples. It's more like now he just doesn't bother with the fake geniality of his prior public persona. Or, in vice versa terms, third semester Kechi is the Black Mask if he weren't so fucking pissed for having just realized that the PT had fooled him. His manner of speaking is still coarse, clipped, and scathing, but at least he's somewhat sane now. This real Akechi no longer hides behind a mask, and fittingly demonstrates traits from both versions of him that we've seen, automatically making third semester smug Kechi the best one. Also best portrait. Starting with the fact that he's still obviously just as ruthless and battle-crazed as the Black Mask is, yet is willing to excuse himself from the battle against Sumire so she doesn't end up killed. He also cares enough to prevent her from getting herself killed when Maruki's palace is collapsing. On another note, the fact that Akechi's only showtime is with Joker and how they're the only ones to come up with it completely on the fly affirms their confidant and how they're just always on the same page. It's also completely in character how, aside from Joker and Sumire to an extent, Akechi doesn't give any of the other Phantom Thieves the time of day, and vice versa for them, but I'll cover that in another video. He only got to know Joker beyond a superficial level, and Sumire has nothing to do with whatever bad blood that is left between him and the others. However, nothing more perfectly highlights his character growth than his absolute resolve to shatter Maruki's altered reality. Culminating in Shido's palace, the biggest lesson he learned was to stop letting his past define him. Remember how he envied Joker for not allowing his past experiences to shackle him? Well, he was finally able to take a page out of his book. Add the fact that the PTs were still showing him compassion, and Joker still held onto their promise after seeing this ugly side of him. Well, it was time to let go of the main driving force behind all his actions for the past 2.5 years. The English localization doesn't quite capture the significance of Akechi's final words, which in Japanese made note that his final opponent is the puppet he used to be, fully reflecting that, both in action and word, he was done being obedient to someone else. This is why living under Maruki's control is such an affront to him, and not only that, but he won't allow Joker to betray his own core beliefs. You see, Joker is the one who taught him how to let go of the past, so there's no way he'll let him remain tied down here by past regrets. It's why he's adamant about hearing it straight from Joker himself, that he won't give in to Maruki's offer. He literally doesn't care if he dies. He won't allow himself and Joker to remain in this fake world. The third semester also does so much for Joker's side of the relationship, since Akechi making it out alive is his biggest wish. The bad ending where Joker takes Maruki's offer pretty much affirms this, as most of the pictures have Akechi and Joker just enjoying each other's company. This isn't vanilla P5 anymore, where there were hardly any details in the main story that showed Joker valued his bond with Akechi. On that note, it's pretty touching how Joker still has Akechi's glove in his pocket if you take the time to speak with Jazz Jin's manager during the last day. But now I'm gonna be that person who ends this wholesome talk by opening a can of worms. Was that even the real Akechi? Is he actually dead? Or is he alive? Was that just a souped-up cognition of him? I can only preface this with, well, we can't know exactly how this works, but I'm quite confident that he was no cognition. First of all, Akechi shows up even before the new year when all these other strange changes to reality started cropping up. I guess we could argue that this is a sign of Maruki granting Joker's wish first out of anyone else's in the world, since he was the one who helped him complete his research. But this just doesn't hold up against what happens to the rest of the PT's cognitions once they snap out of their false utopia, right? Wakaba and Haru's dad both disappear, yet Akechi still sticks around for the entire rest of the semester. On another note, we are never shown definitive proof that Akechi is dead in the first place. We're just going off the assumption that he makes based on his memory lapsing after Shido's palace. There's also Mona's existence in the real reality after everyone wished for him to be back to consider. Who's to say this can't happen with Akechi? Ultimately, I'd love to hear in the comments what plausible theories you guys can come up with regarding third semester Akechi and the glimpse we get of him in what the P5R devs claim to be the true ending. But in the end, I can't say I'd be happy with an ending that doesn't have Akechi serve some sort of sentence for all the people he's killed. With that said, I'd really like to shill the fanfic Black Star by Haso Tobi. Her writing style is superb, mixing in the text chat logs and news media coverage that completely captures the spirit of the game. It really just feels like a sequel to the vanilla P5 and does a lot of good to Akechi's character without shying away from the consequences. As always, link in the description. Anyway, overall, I'm just super satisfied with what they did with Akechi in this game. He had the potential to be one of my favorite characters in anything ever, but didn't quite make it there due to poor execution in vanilla P5. But I can safely say after experiencing P5R that he's definitely become one of my faves in any given medium. Thanks so much for watching this long documentary on the Pancakes boy. I would really appreciate the likes if you liked this. I have a lot more P5R content planned in the future, so subscribe for more if you're so inclined. I'm also tempted to do more Japanese sociocultural contexts on the other party members, so let me know if you'd like to see more of that. Thanks so much again, and until next time, take care.